Welcome in TNC Radio.live. This is the Truckers Network Radio Show. And now here's your host, Shelley Johnson.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Yes, this is the Truckers Network Radio Show on TNCRadio.live, where we offer the news, information, traffic, weather, sports, and entertainment our commercial drivers need and want. History and holidays are some of the topics we really like to cover. Easter is a widely celebrated holiday in America, and we thought we would consult with historian and author Jeff Bensch again to talk about how the traditions evolved in America. Jeff is the author of The History of American Holidays, which celebrates America's history, culture, and patriotism with thought-provoking stories about the most popular holidays that Americans celebrate. Jeff has terrific insights and little-known facts about how the holidays evolved in the United States. It's entertaining and informative. Thank you, Jeff, for being back on the show with us.
Well, thank you, Shelley. It's always a pleasure. Appreciate it.
I love our discussions. I mean, you have some interesting facts that I never encountered in school. I was talking to you about that on break, that so many of the history books were kind of boring. Your book is not. And it really, I think, puts everything into perspective.
Yeah, it's not boring. It's just pretty short and simple, and it just tells the stories. And stories are a lot easier to remember than dates, so it makes it a little more
gosh. Yes. Like, when was the War of 1812? Like, that's got to be the dumbest test question you ever had, right?
Yeah. I think it's more important to remember what was that war about, but
yeah. And no, I don't think anybody really does know.
No.
But they remember the date. So
yeah.
Easter is a holiday that everyone likes, I think, because it's the beginning of spring and all of that, but it really is more than Easter eggs and chocolate bunnies, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but it does have a few what I call humorous aspects to it. As long as you don't consider the humor irreverent, but the history of Easter kind of helps explain all of that. But if you consider the 6-year-old asking their mom, "Do rabbits lay eggs?" There's a little humor there, and then the smart aleck 6-year-old might say, "Okay, if rabbits do not make eggs, then where do the bunnies come from?" Or you could think of the insufferable teenager asking dad, "Why is Easter on a different day every year?" I mean, Jesus was born on December 25th. Why didn't he die on the same day every year? And why do they call it Good Friday? It wasn't exactly a good day. I mean, it's the day he died, right?
Yeah.
So each of these things can be explained. And you mentioned the eggs and bunnies in the springtime, and they do come from the pagan festivals celebrating the spring and the rebirth of a new year. Obviously the eggs, symbolize that, and the rabbits were known for procreating, and in Northern Europe, the bunnies were present in large numbers in the spring grasses, so they became synonymous with springtime.
Interesting.
Yeah, and as Christianity moved north from the Roman Empire, the pagans were converted to Christianity, and like a few of our holidays, the pagan festivals were incorporated into Christianity, so that it was easier to convert people to Christianity rather than argue about it. So eggs and bunnies are examples of continuing pagan traditions incorporated into Christianity. And the eggs work well for Christianity too, because the chick hatching from an egg has come to symbolize Jesus leaving the tomb, upon his resurrection.
Right.
And decorating eggs dates back to the 1200s, when they were often forbidden during Lent, and then at the end of Lent, they could be eaten in celebration of Easter. So
they decorated the eggs, probably not the same way, but they paint them. Did they make them into elaborate eggs, or?
I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but it said they decorated them, and I'm sure, however, whatever art forms they used, but just more or less to kind of preserve them through the period of Lent, and then being able to celebrate with them on Easter.
Now, I'm going to kind of digress here because we're talking about eggs. The Fabergé eggs, I believe that was actually made for Tsar Nicholas's mother, wasn't it, in Russia? Was that an Easter gift or?
I am not familiar with the Fabergé eggs.
Oh, yeah. I had an opportunity to actually see some in an exhibit. It was just amazing. But Fabergé, I believe, was a jeweler. I may not have my facts correct here, but these elaborate eggs, and I think that the Tsar's family, the Tsarina, would give them away too to select people during their reign in Russia.
Oh, interesting. So they give them away before Easter.
I'm not sure, but my assumption is because it was an egg, it was probably right around Easter time. And I believe, well, the Tsar's family, they were a member of the Greek Orthodox Church, which is a branch of the Catholic Church. So
Right.
I would imagine, I'm assuming here, and I know that's a dangerous word to use, but I think so. I think it was Easter. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to do a little research on that, because that sounds interesting, and how they had it sounds like it could tie in well to the Easter egg hunt as well. If you have special eggs, and that have some more value to them. And
These eggs you definitely don't want to lose. They're
yeah.
they're worth a lot of money with jewels and gold and all of that, and they open up.
Wow.
Hmm.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah. So sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, yeah. The other thing about Easter was why is it on a different day every year? And the quick answer is because it's centered around the Jewish holiday of Passover. And the longer answer is the story of Passover, because it's out of the Bible, and begins when the ancient Hebrews, the Israelites or Jewish people, were slaves in Egypt, and this is under the Egyptian Pharaoh Ramesses, around 12 to 1300 BC, and working for the Pharaoh, the Hebrew population grew to a point where the Pharaoh became uneasy that he wouldn't be able to control all the Hebrew slaves. And so he implemented a practice that the firstborn Hebrew son of each family would be drowned in the Nile River.
right.
So killing the firstborn. But during this time, one baby was secretly set on a tiny raft because the mother, couldn't come to drown him. And the raft was made of leaves and parchment and allowed to float down the river. And the baby was picked up by the Pharaoh's daughters and given the name Moses and raised in the royal family. And within the family, Moses had a brother, Aaron. And but one day Moses saw some Egyptians mistreating some Jewish slaves, and Moses killed the Egyptians. And so his safety was in danger, and he fled to the desert, to an area called Midian. And while there, as a young man, he saved a group of girls from some shepherds who were giving the girls a hard time. And the girl's father's name was Jethro, and took in Moses. And so Moses was getting along just fine. But it was during this time that he was able to talk to God. And the story of Moses would meet God at Mount Sinai. And it was here that God told Moses that he had to go free the Hebrew slaves in Egypt. And Moses, God was, getting a little tired of the Pharaohs killing the Hebrews. So Moses took God's message back to the Pharaoh, and the message was free the slaves, or I'll cast down upon you a series of plagues. And the Pharaoh didn't believe Moses, and so the first plague was the plague of blood, where the Nile River turned red, and maybe a scientific explanation for that would be a red algae. The second plague was frogs came out of the river, possibly escaping the algae, but there were just frogs everywhere. And then third plague was the plague of lice, and then the plague of flies, and then pestilence, which is the bubonic plague, basically a cattle livestock disease. Actually, it's the livestock and cattle disease that causes the bubonic plague in humans. And then boils and hail and locusts, and then darkness. And finally, God cast down the slaying of the firstborn of Egyptian families. And so God wanted to protect the Hebrew children. So through Moses, he told the Hebrews that sacrifice a sheep and take the sheep's blood and paint it over the door. And then when the avenging angel of death comes to kill all the Egyptian firstborns, the angel of death will pass over the Hebrew households that have the paint above their door. So that's our Passover holiday, the Jewish Passover holiday.
Right.
So this was finally enough, and the Pharaoh freed the Hebrew slaves, and Moses led them back to Canaan, or Israel. But somewhere along the way, the Pharaoh changed his mind and sent an army to get the slaves back. And this is where Moses parted the Red Sea and made it through. And then when Hebrews got to the other side, the sea collapsed and drowned all of the Pharaoh's army. And it took Moses, and the Hebrews, another 40 years to get all the way back to the land of Israel. But so what does this all have to do with Easter? Is that Jesus was Jewish, of course, and he was celebrating Passover at the time of his crucifixion, because the Jewish Passover includes a traditional meal, a Seder feast, and it contains bitter herbs and unleavened bread and other traditional foods. For instance, their bitter herbs represent slavery, and then unleavened bread would be the Hebrews had to leave in such a hurry that their bread didn't have time to rise, and then the other parts of the meal rejoice the joys of freedom. And so the Last Supper was a Seder feast, and that's how it gets tied together with Passover.
Okay.
And then Passover is celebrated every year based on the Hebrew calendar. So that's a little bit different. It's a lunar calendar. It's based on the moon rather than the sun, which the Gregorian calendar that everyone uses today is a solar calendar.
Right.
And so the lunar calendar, I kind of find fascinating, is that it's actually about 11 days shorter than the solar year. And so it uses this 19-year metatonic cycle, they call it, to bring it into line with the solar year. And within the 19 years, every 2 or 3 years, you have to add a day or a month and change things around a little bit. So it gets a little complicated. And even with these 19-year cycles, every year it's off by about 6 minutes. And so every 216 years, you got to add a full day. So it's amazing how people figure these things out, and how back in the day they were able to understand this solar calendar, and now today we have it down to the second, and it's,
Sure.
to me, it's amazing how science figures all this out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We do have to go to break here, Jeff. I think this gives us a really good introduction on
Mhm.
why the dates change every year, and certainly the history and how everything's related to Passover with Easter. There's a lot more, though, I know. You've got some great information to share with us. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson, and I'm talking with historian and author Jeff Bensch about Easter, and we're going to be talking about other holidays and other really interesting information as well. So stay tuned right here on TNCRadio.live. The Truckers Network helps professional drivers save money and makes their lives easier. We were created for drivers by a commercial driver. We know the industry and driver needs. A Truckers Network membership offers exclusive discounts through our trusted partners on things like truck care, truck parking, tires, oil changes, fuel additives, fitness, roadside assistance, first aid kits, driver training, and a whole lot more. Start saving today. Check us out at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. That's app.thetruckersnetwork.net. The trucking industry keeps America running thanks to the 3.36 million professional truck drivers who deliver everyday goods to 80% of American communities who rely on trucking for that last mile. The industry represents a diverse group with nearly half of drivers at 42% as minorities. Trucking Moves America Forward, or TMAF, educates the public on the essentiality of trucking by telling the story of trucking and its positive impact on our economy, communities, and lives. Learn how you can join the industry movement by visiting truckingmovesamerica.com. Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show. I'm Shelley Johnson here on TNCRadio.live. I'm talking with historian and author Jeff Bensch about Easter. We were just talking about Passover and how all of this has evolved. Jeff, you said you have a fact that you consider the most enjoyable about Easter.
Yes, and that's when does Easter occur? Because it is a different day every year, and before the internet, I had no idea how they did it. I think if you're brought up in a Jewish household, you may really understand even as a youngster. But because Passover is celebrated on the 15th day of the month of Nisan in the Hebrew calendar, and Nisan begins on the spring equinox. So from all of this, Easter is celebrated on the first Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox. So if you go outside tonight, you check it out, the moon's going to be pretty darn full because we're after March 21st, and this coming Sunday is Easter. So it just makes sense. The moon's going to be close to full. Whether it's full earlier this week or later this week, I'm not sure, but it's pretty full right now. So I spent my whole life wondering, and when I found out, I thought that was the most interesting fact about Easter.
Absolutely. Well, I know it's easy to get confused. It's like, when's Easter this year? You know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's anywhere between March 21st and something like April 28th or something like that.
Yeah, because there are years when Easter is closer to Mother's Day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so that Last Supper was on a Thursday night, the Seder feast. And then the next day, Jesus was arrested, taken to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, to be tried, and he was found innocent. But the Roman clergy demanded his crucifixion because he claimed to be the Son of God, and they didn't think that could be possible. And so Jesus was crucified on Friday, and then we know he rises from the dead on the third day, and that's another thing you can wonder about. See, so if you had Friday, and then Saturday would be one day, and Sunday would be 2 days. So that was the third day, but the third day of this celebration, I guess, from
Right.
Friday counts as one of the days, and then of course Jesus, suffers and dies for mankind's sins, and then God provides eternal life for all who accept Jesus as their Savior. And but the other answer also for Good Friday. Good used to be synonymous with holy, so you could think of it as Holy Friday, and then that makes a lot more sense. Um, and then it's good in that, it's like I said, he died for mankind's sins, and God provides eternal life, and Jesus Christ is our Savior, all that.
Right.
But the other kind of interesting thing, these stories like Moses being put in the river, and Jesus, being born in a manger and then suffering through significant oppression, and it's both of them in their lives, and then they find this freedom, whether through resurrection or bringing this Hebrews out of Egypt back to the promised land and all that. And following that, the covenant with God, sort of this agreement with God. These stories have that common flow to them, common theme of oppression, freedom, and then the covenant. And there are a number of stories that exist in the Bible, even as well as the legends of the beginning of the Roman Empire are very similar, but that's for another day. And I just find it interesting, even the Quran of the Islamic faith is basically based on the same stories.
Right.
They all go back to Abraham in the Bible, and they're all considered, what do they call it, Abrahamic religions, so that all worshiping the same God. I just find that interesting as well, that there's so much similarity, but yet for whatever reason people can't get along. That I find that interesting, in that even within the Islamic faith, the Muslims have the Sunnis and the Shiites, and even they don't get along.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I found that interesting, in that the Sunnis, they were descendants of Muhammad. They have Muhammad as their savior, and he came along about 600 years after Jesus, and that when he died, like his disciples wanted to appoint a new leader through a sort of this appointed council, and that would be the Sunnis, and kind of like a pope,
Right.
But the Shiites, they wanted be led by descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, so kind of a family bloodline leadership within the faith. And so that was like in 650 Common Era. So like whatever that is, 1400 years ago or 1600 years ago. So it's like they've been arguing ever since. And so I kind of look at that and say, what can we do? And not much, but it does make me really appreciate the sort of the separation of church and state, because the church can have such an enormous power over people, and everyone believes what they believe, but to get along, sometimes you got to recognize, sort of the, all the good things within your religion, love and goodwill towards others and all that. But sometimes it's hard for people to say, yeah, love and goodwill towards everyone who believes like me. But it's really hard to have that love and goodwill towards the people who believe something different. And that's what,
in the United States, one of the major motivators was freedom from religious persecution, and the First Amendment, of course, protects religious practices, and that's been something very unique, I think, about our country in terms of our history with the Constitution. So I think they were trying to break away from some of that. Certainly, a lot of people who came here, they were not welcomed in their own country. So our forefathers thought of all of that.
they certainly did, and they saw how how powerful the church could be over people. And then, living in coming from Europe and sort of the Middle East throughout history with the Crusades and everything else, people have been fighting over these things. And our founding fathers recognized that there are better ways for a society to exist, and tried to establish something that gave us the best of both worlds.
Sure. Well, it's hard enough for human beings to get along. You know,
For sure.
it really, human beings, I don't think we get along as well as animals do, in many ways. So, yeah, it's something that I think the Constitution has been an amazing document. It was the first of its kind for sure. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It provides all this freedom, and we've done a sort of amazing job in allowing those freedoms to be expanded rather than constricted.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And Easter, now, is that an official holiday for the United States, or how did all of that evolve?
Yeah, it is not an official holiday for the United States. It's it's just a religious holiday, and just like Passover is, and a lot of people now are just because of their lunar calendars, the Muslims are celebrating Ramadan right now.
Right.
But that kind of moves throughout the year over the decades, I guess. But anyway, it's all kind of right now. But these spring observances are not federal holidays, and I don't know that anyone's ever made a push for it. Although Easter Monday would be a good fit. It is sort of like the third day, and a lot of people believe it's sort of like the first day Jesus is alive, and it's often celebrated quite a bit, actually. But no, it's never been a federal holiday, and now it might be a little more difficult because it does have such a religious significance, and the separation of church and state. Right. Might be a little more difficult now to get something like that passed.
When did Easter Sunday become a holiday per se in the United States? I mean, it was always celebrated, certainly, but Easter as we know it today.
Oh, I think it's always been with us. That's a good question of how the traditions came to the United States. Because I think, from my perspective, it's just it's always been with us, because but yeah, I'll have to look into that a little more and see if there are any unique aspects to it. As it came over, with the pilgrims and all of that.
Well, I know the Easter basket and all of that. I mean, growing up, I remember all of that. And of course, I remember going to Sunday service. I got my white patent leather shoes versus the black patent leather shoes and a special dress and Easter bonnet, if you will. And that was always kind of exciting. And of course, growing up in Michigan, it usually the weather was nice. So, it's a memorable, I think, holiday, especially for the children.
Yeah, I agree. It is such a springtime thing. It is the first time in quite a few months you've been able to wear something with a little bit of color to it, and you didn't have to wear a parka or anything like that. But yeah, it is interesting because it is sort of like here we are from bunnies and chocolate Easter eggs to religions of the world. Springtime is the rebirth of the seasons, and as we wake up from that darkness of winter. So it is, whether it is religious significance or a celebration of the season, Easter, Passover, and other whatever spring observances, they do provide a sort of a similar time for reflection and renewal.
Sure.
And not just renewal in the sense of starting a new phase of the year, but this one, Easter, to me is always a little different. It's it ties more into our overall existence, our meaning of life, and what happens in the afterlife, and it gives you a sort of a chance to contemplate that a little bit, and maybe develop a appreciation for the sort of the miracle of life.
Sure. How did the Easter egg hunt evolve? Do you know? Is that something that was brought over to the United States, or did it evolve within the 20th century? Or
You know, I think I think that dates all the way back to the pagan rituals.
okay,
Yeah, but how it was brought to the United States, I'm going to look into that a little bit.
well, I know that kids love it, and it's an excuse for the adults to say, "All right, get outside."
Yeah.
And we'll enjoy. It's usually what after Easter dinner or something like that, and the children go out and they go look for those Easter eggs, and well, and the parents have lots of fun hiding them. Let's face it, it's a family tradition that's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, it is, and nothing's more exciting than hunting for something because the thrill of finding it, and just like that's just like anything from shopping for a sale or a bargain to finding an Easter egg, and then uh, and then the prizes, of course.
Sure.
Kids do love it without
Hmm.
uh, really recognizing it all. We always did ours Easter morning, and then as a parent, I always found the hardest part was making sure um, I didn't hide any of them too good and then forget where they were.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, if they're real eggs, they would start to smell after a while. Yeah, just a little bit. Uh-huh.
yeah, I had to keep track,
Hmm.
do a head count when it was over.
Well, of course, that's where the plastic eggs are real handy. They don't
Yeah,
tend to smell after a while.
yeah, and they're a lot easier to make look pretty year after year without having to put forth a lot of effort into it.
Sure. And you can put stuff in those Easter eggs. And of course, jelly beans, those kind of go with Easter, don't they?
Yeah, anything that'll fit in the egg, but and they're egg shaped as well, so that works well. Um, and chocolate was always our go-to. And then as we got older, make them out of marzipan. I think that's the almond paste, and
Oh,
that made for really tasty eggs.
that's interesting. I've never heard of that. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of an Italian tradition, I think.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so uh, it, it's really good, and it's a little unexpected if you haven't had it before. So
Yeah, I don't think I've ever tried that. That sounds really interesting. I know chocolate bunnies. Those you could either get the solid chocolate bunny or the hollow one. That's always kind of a disappointment when it's a hollow one and it's like, oh
yeah,
darn it, I wanted more chocolate, right?
yeah, you kind of you feel like, hey, this is false advertising here. What's going
It's like, mommy, why are these bunnies hollow? Right.
on?
And then of course, peeps. Some people don't think it's not Easter unless they get their peeps.
Oh, yes, that's right. I personally never liked those, so
I never did either. It's way too much sugar. And I got them in my Easter basket though. It's like, okay. I mean, they're cute.
yeah, something to trade with my sisters.
My sister was a lot older, so she wasn't trading with me on any of that. But I got the peeps and the jelly beans.
Uh-huh. All
Hmm.
right.
Yeah, which always made for an interesting Easter basket.
Mhm. Um, yeah, yeah, it sure did. Um, yeah, it's a lot of candy that probably don't need, but we were
Ah,
able
that's
to,
half the fun.
yeah. So
And kids love it.
I'm gonna do a little deeper dive into the traditions of the Easter egg hunt. So we'll have
Oh,
something to talk about next year.
okay, that sounds good. What I thought we could do is go to break here because I know that you had some other information you wanted to share with us. But this is pretty fascinating on how everything evolved and some of the history that maybe people aren't aware of. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson. I'm talking with historian and author Jeff Bensch. We've been talking about Easter. We're going to be talking about some more information here too, so definitely stay tuned for some great facts coming up right here on tncradio.live. TNCRadio.live is proud to carry the Steve Summers Overnight Drive Show. TNCRadio.live is dedicated to commercial drivers. We offer the news, traffic, and weather you need, and the entertainment, sports, talk, music, and celebrity interviews you want to hear 24/7. We have original shows and trucker podcasts that feature some of your favorites, like Ice Road Alex Debogorski and America's Truckin' Sweetheart Marcia Campbell. TNCRadio.live is convenient and designed for professional drivers. The best part is we're free, and you can listen anywhere you are on the road. With just one tap, you can tune into Steve Summers and us right on your phone. Simply download our app by going to app.tncradio.live. That's app.tncradio.live. Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson, and I'm talking with historian and author Jeff Bensch. We've been discussing Easter, some of the history behind all of that, some of the traditions in North America. Jeff, you also said the daylight savings time is something that's interesting, and of course it happens every spring. It always seems to trip people up every time the time changes. What's the history of daylight savings time? Because a lot of people think it's just absolutely nuts.
Yeah, it gets a lot of press lately. I'd say the last few years, whereas I kind of recall growing up, that it was just something that would happen, and people are questioning it. And as I know more about it, I hear more about it. It seems like, and although it's not a holiday, it's definitely turning into a spring tradition. And as you know, in the spring, the clocks spring forward, and this practice, artificially makes the mornings darker and the evenings lighter during the summer. Thus, thereby allowing us to sleep better in the morning darkness and enjoy longer daylight hours in the evening. And in the fall, the clocks fall back, allowing greater morning light so we can wake up at a reasonable time and it'll be light out. It also allows school children to go to school in the light rather than waking up and traveling and often walking to school in the darkness. So, but the tradition kind of dates way back to like the Romans used a water clock that varied with the seasons and kind of automatically adjusted to the time, to the length of daylight. But Benjamin Franklin is often given credit for introducing the formal daylight savings concept in the United States. And at the time, Ben was concerned about sleeping during the daylight morning hours and then burning too many candles during the evening hours. And we're all familiar with Ben Franklin's quote, "Early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." So he wanted his mornings to be brighter, and that would be in the fall. But actually, his ideas did not take hold, and others are given credit for bringing it to sort of modern times. There's this guy, George Vernon Hudson, an entomologist in New Zealand, and he needed more light after he got off work, so he goes searching for insects. And he first published papers in 1895 and 1898, attempting to institute a 2-hour shift in New Zealand. And then there was an Englishman, William Willett, and independent of the guys in New Zealand, he developed the idea in 1905 when he noticed too many people sleeping through the morning hours of daylight. And then there was also Mr. Willett was a golfer and did not like his rounds being cut short at dusk. And so now we know the real reason for daylight savings. Right? So we can golf in the twilight hours, but then the modern day savings, daylight savings began in Germany during World War I to conserve coal. Again, not wanting to burn too many candles at night.
Right.
And Britain and other European countries soon followed, and the United States adopted daylight savings in 1918 as an energy conservation measure. And then The practice was abandoned after the war and then restarted again during World War II. And then the decision was originally left to the states after World War II, where each state could elect on their own if they wanted to do daylight savings time. And then finally, Congress enacted the Uniform Time Act, and it was in 1966, which is not
Wow.
that long ago.
Yeah.
And Hawaii and Arizona, they never did follow suit or change their clocks. And Hawaii sort of makes sense because they're close to the equator and they don't experience a substantial difference in daylight hours. As you move north, it's more drastic. But I don't know why Arizona didn't want to buy in. They just kind of want to be different or just resistant to change. I don't know. But and then you might recall in the if you're my age anyway, back when I was a teenager in the 70s, we had the energy crisis and Congress enacted an earlier daylight savings start dates so that it would supposedly save more energy. And then the Energy Policy Act of 2005 restored the earlier start dates. So we're changing our clocks in early March than previously, and I don't know if it's later in October where
Right.
we're back again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the history of it. And I know a lot of people are always wondering, why do we do it? Is it just for some twilight golf and just conserve energy? But I kind of view it as a good thing because I like falling back as well because I like it to be brighter in the morning. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the sun coming up at certain times of the year till 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and that gets a little too dark for me.
Sure.
Yeah.
And depending on what part of the country you're in, it can really be dark. Of course,
Yeah.
Certain parts of the world, they have darkness consistently.
Yeah, like Alaska. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they're
I
like
don't
daylight savings. Hey, that's not helping us one bit, right? But I
Yeah.
find the history of this quite interesting. So it was basically an efficiency expert like Benjamin Franklin, bug hunting and golfing, that initially put that concept out there for people.
There you have it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Bug hunting and golfing. I like that.
A lot of times when you're golfing, you might end up running into some bugs, but you didn't intend to, right?
Oh, yeah. I've been there, done that. Yeah.
So there are people who say the daylight savings, let's just keep it the way it is because it throws people off every year. And I think that people like it when it's what it is right now, where you have a longer daylight at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. Most people like that. Not everyone's needs to get up early or really cares about getting up early, but everybody likes having a little bit of extra light in the evening. And so I totally get that. I do myself enjoy it getting dark in the, like around Christmas time when all the lights come on in the streets and the stores and the neighborhoods.
Sure.
So I don't mind the change. Kind of used to it. And I'm an early riser, so I like it being a little bit brighter in the morning, so I can get up and get my day going. But
Mhm.
I get it. I always wonder what truck drivers think if they notice anything with traffic, like if you have rush hour traffic in the morning and it's dark out, is that more difficult to drive through, or is that something to avoid altogether? And so I wonder what they think because they're a group of people that see more sunrises and sunsets
Well, they
than
do.
the rest of us.
That's right. And they can be in multiple time zones in a day, depending on where they're traveling. So, yeah.
Mhm.
We have a couple of minutes here. I wanted people to know where they can find you, Jeff, and where they can find your book.
Um, Yes, I have a webpage, jeffbensch.com. It's an author's webpage, and it's JEFFBENSCH.com. And then the book is available on Amazon or Barnes and Noble and a few other online outlets. You can get the ebook, or you can have a printed copy sent to you. And on the webpage, there's some links to some of the other online outlets. But Barnes and Noble and Amazon are the big ones, and should be pretty easy to find.
You've got some really interesting stories. And I find it amazing all the different factoids that you've run across. And you just have a different perspective on how you've pursued history, which makes it an interesting read. Because I think, if people kind of got turned off about history in school because it was boring, too date oriented and that sort of thing, and no relevance, you provided a relevance to people where they can really relate in your book. It's like, oh, I never knew that. And I think people like that a lot.
Yeah, I hope so. And I do try to tie these holidays into our social fabric and why they're important as Americans, that we can unite around our holidays. And tried to write the book so it was a little bit lighthearted, and hopefully it makes a good gift book if you need something for your mom on Mother's Day. Like I said, hopefully a mom would like reading about it, and
Yeah.
reading about Mother's Day in addition to sharing the stories with her own family to build the family tradition as well as the national holiday tradition.
It's absolutely a great read. The History of American Holidays by Jeff Bensch. Definitely check that out. You've been listening to the Truckers Network radio show here on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned for more great entertainment and information here on TNCRadio.live. Thank you for listening to another great interview on TNCRadio.live and the Truckers Network radio show. All of the material you hear on TNCRadio.live, on our website, our broadcasts, or our podcasts are copyrighted. There can be no distribution without the express consent of TNCRadio.live and its partners. For inquiries, write us at info@tncradio.live. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast of the Truckers Network radio show.